Welcome to the third presentation in your Introduction to Hristotherapy. In the two presentations of this module, you will be introduced to elicitation, the management of mental states. In therapy, the most active mental state is trance. As in our discussion of learning, in these presentations, we cover only the central ideas offered in the written materials. The elicitation manual adds specific methods that we will address in detail in later modules. You will also find scripts for various methods of trance elicitation, the subject of our next presentation. Historically, elicitation of trance was too commonly a power trip exploited for glory and profit. The client's experience was secondary. Milton Erickson, the foremost clinical hypnotherapist of the last century, inverted the priorities. He recognized that the healing potential of trance comes with vulnerabilities. In his protégés, Erickson cultivated humility as a protective virtue, an attitude that I also embrace. As therapists, we are responsible for organizing elicitation for the client's benefit. Fulfilling that responsibility is possible only in the context of a consensual alliance. As compared to other trance-active therapists, we achieve rapid and lasting benefits, primarily because we conceive of elicitation as a practice of relationship rather than as a form of control. In this presentation, we will motivate the rest of your training. To emphasize, our goal is to help clients develop responsive behaviors. That is a learning process, and all learning is inhibited by the division of the mind into conscious and subconscious realms. We start with a review of that situation, emphasizing the critical mind, the gatekeeper that stands between the two realms. Responses develop as compacts between the conscious and subconscious parts of the mind. But how does that occur? To avoid disastrous mistakes, the mind uses mental states to safeguard learning. With the critical mind in place, 4 states are normal. In waking states, we gather information and assess outcomes. In dreams, we explore possibilities while the body is disabled. A 5th mental state is attained when we are confident that our environment and goals are compatible. The critical mind dissolves, and responses evolve in real time. One thread of our discussion will describe the mental states, their purpose and side effects. In a second thread, we categorize the methods for eliciting the state. Once elicited, the client can be guided towards specific therapeutic benefits. The sketches offered here will be detailed in modules to follow, starting with the elicitation of trance in our next presentation. Elicitation places our clients in a vulnerable condition. There is therapeutic opportunity in that vulnerability. Gurus such as Milton Erickson described miraculous outcomes attained by dancing a patient along the edge of a dark mental chasm. As Christotherapists, we surrender such ambitions. Our goal instead is to teach the client to manage their mind. To support this learning, we organized each session as a tour of mental states. Again, this process is outlined today with details and lectures to follow. As our clients mature in their practice, we earn trust that allows us to bear witness to and safeguard their journey to fulfillment. In such moments, I experience an awe that is far more valuable than the payment I receive. Elicitation makes use of the brain's natural capacities and limitations. As learning is the brain's purpose, mental states correspond to major learning functions. Each state creates conditions that advance learning while protecting the brain from the confusion of daily life. The critical mind controls the sequence, so let's review its role in learning. The critical mind protects the behaviors that preserve our well-being. These behaviors are held in the subconscious. The conscious mind navigates society. When a crisis is encountered, the red lightning bolt, the experience is held in the critical mind. In dreams, when the body is prevented from acting, we consider possible reactions to the crisis and rank them for impact on our well-being. When these reactions are implemented and accepted by the conscious mind, they graduate as responses. Receptivity is the first step in learning. For those free from anxiety, this is our default waking state. When a crisis is encountered, the brain narrows its focus and improvises a temporary solution. During sleep, the body consolidates our experience. Following a physical crisis, this may include healing, but normally consolidation reorganizes blood flow, removes toxins, and supports cellular growth. Finally, we must refine our behavior. If we find, for example, that exercise is beneficial to our well-being, we need to allocate chemical resources and adjust our schedule to support our new routine. This work is done in dreams. A fully unified mind is rare in adult life, but as hristotherapist, our goal is to awaken that potential. Once the critical mind dissolves, receptivity, improvisation, and refinement fuse together as creativity. Organic adaptation continues in consolidation. Psychiatrists recognize these same states but describe them in operational terms. Each state has a typical pattern of electrical activity reflecting activation of different functions. The sustainability of a mental state is determined by its organic side effects. Each state also has a characteristic impact on our behavior. Let's start with the simplest state, the delta state in which learning is consolidated. The electrical activity in this state is unique. Pulses called sleep spindles originate from the forehead and sweep over the brain from front to back. In the mind, consolidation involves weighing events and thoughts. We transfer the most important memories to long-term storage. More broadly, however, consolidation builds the organic capacity to sustain effective behaviors. This involves not only purging the body of waste, but also strengthening the supporting tissues. Muscles become larger, organs lay in stores of chemicals, and nerve endings proliferate. So while in the delta state we are unresponsive to events, upon waking we benefit from increased capacity. Conversely, if we do not spend enough time in the delta state, capacity will decline. This is because the brain fills with toxic waste until entering the delta state. To facilitate cleaning, the scaffolding cells of the brain shrink, allowing the brain fluid to flow more quickly to waste collection centers. In our lesson on personality, we offered several views on personal growth. That growth is driven by confrontation with crises that cannot be solved until we develop new capacities. In fact, some of these crises are so fundamental that the brain changes its architecture. This brain sculpting is done in the delta state. In the final stages of gestation, the fetus spends 90% of its time in the delta state, and the brain grows rapidly. The highest function of the brain is relationship, and Matt Walker in Why We Sleep reports that interrupting the delta state can prevent growth of the lobe that supports that purpose. Rather than vaccines, coffee may be the driver of our epidemic of autism. Birth is, of course, an unparalleled crisis. The infant is thrust into a world of sensations that must be interpreted and sorted. A surplus of neurons support this work. Upon reaching adolescence, puberty is the next great crisis. Unused neurons and connections are shed as we focus on refining behaviors that give us influence over our peers. Sometime in early adulthood, we expand our concern to the needs of our intimates. The moral centers of the brain develop. This launches us into the long span of adulthood, which seeks mastery in relationship. As seniors, our productivity is limited by weakening of muscles and senses. The brain, unable to monitor events and mount timely interventions, learns to anticipate outcomes based upon past experience. This is recognized as wisdom. While seniors often cannot reconstruct a detailed history, they remember why things happened. This broad perspective allows them to avoid distractions and thus to attain more challenging goals. We should recognize these life transitions in our clients. Given their different capacities, therapies that empower a senior may be ineffective with an adolescent, and vice versa. Given that language and imagination are disabled in the delta state, it has little utility during a therapy session. That said, sufficient delta state sleep is critical to successful therapy. If consolidation does not take place, any weakness in the body will limit the outcomes achieved by our client. Worse, when the client is actually deprived of delta sleep, brain poisoning will erode rationality and emotional regulation, frustrating the goals defined in therapy and undermining motivation to continue. For this reason, we will study sleep hygiene and therapy as one of our first application areas. No matter what your planned emphasis, restoring healthful sleep patterns is essential to success. Along with structured routines, bedtime recordings facilitate the initial surrender to the delta state. You will be provided samples to inspire your own offerings. Next on our progression of mental activity is the theta state. This is the dream state in which we refine our behaviors. Brain activity is low, reflecting inhibition of voluntary muscle control. Still, at 4 to 7 beats a second, we are able to replay events and imagine actions and outcomes. This imaginative play allows us to refine our behavior. Dreaming occurs in the theta state. While the brainwave patterns resemble those of normal waking, two important aspects of waking thought are suppressed. The first is expectation. As a result, the theta state is remarkably creative, a fact exploited by Thomas Edison. When intellectually frustrated, he would recline in a dental chair with steel balls in his hand. He would harvest new ideas when, upon entering the theta state, his hand relaxed and the noise of the falling balls woke him. Following trauma, the subconscious returns to the experience in dreams each night, seeking an escape in the event of a recurrence. Fortunately, production of norepinephrine, the neurotransmitter that activates anxiety, is also suppressed in the theta state. If daily life is calm, anxiety will not be refelt during the replay of the trauma, and the subconscious will turn its attention away from the trauma and toward new opportunities. Given these benefits for creativity and healing, dream incubation is a powerful aid to every therapy. Our module on sleep will introduce you to those techniques. While normally dreams occur while the body is inactive, experiments have shown that if dreaming is systematically disrupted, our need to dream drives us to take on the work when waking. As hallucinations are symptomatic of psychosis, we should not be surprised that insomnia is an indicator in most psychiatric conditions, but it is also a state in which the brain is intensely creative. Hristotherapy can allow clients to enter the alpha state in comfort, receiving its benefits without the trauma of chronic insomnia. The most direct means of eliciting the theta state is the authoritative trance induction. By authoritative, we suggest that the therapist controls the unfolding of the subconscious activity. This begins by focusing waking awareness on comforting sensory detail until the critical mind becomes overloaded, allowing our words to drop directly into the subconscious. Let me say that again. This begins by focusing waking awareness on comforting sensory detail until the critical mind becomes overloaded, allowing our words to drop directly into the subconscious. In formulating our suggestions, we lean into the attitudes of the client. Adventurers, confident in their practical skills, respond immediately to direct commands. Protectors, confident in their ability to solve problems, prefer to follow inferences, with behaviors changing only after several nights of dreaming. Many clients come to us for relief with emotional negativity. As we know, emotions characterize our physiological response to experience. When we suggest greater confidence, then, the effects must propagate down to the parts of the mind that control our posture and metabolism. This is the problem of depth. Anxious behaviors are built upon deep layers of expectation. In the first session, our suggestions could shift the client's internal dialogue away from "I'll never do it" to "it will be fun to try." But it may be several sessions before we are trusted to speak to the deeper parts of the mind. Trust can be built through fractionation, bringing the client into a lighter state of trance before offering that they can go even deeper. At each step, the deeper networks are introduced to the comfort achieved in the higher networks, seducing them to allow access to deeper networks. In navigating depth, we can use idiomotor responses, physical signals, such as a finger lift or motion of a pendulum bob, that indicate permission to proceed. When a layer is breached too rapidly, twitches and jerks called abreactions signal that we should slow down. In daily experience, of course, the subconscious relies upon the conscious mind for guidance. Approaching the podium, the client may think, "Am I sure?" The dialogue prior to trance allows us to find the right words to offer in that moment. This cognitive foundation evolves during the course of therapy, becoming another factor in the pace of change. Move too fast at the subconscious level, and conflict arises with conscious expectations. If not managed, that conflict manifests as therapeutic resistance. This was Sigmund Freud's experience with hypnotherapy. He ordered the subconscious around and eventually it ignored him. Of course, this can also arise in the client's own mind. When the conscious mind demands sacrifices of well-being in pursuit of social ambitions, the subconscious will resist a trance. Elicitation in this case must be patient and gentle, and often the client will show all the signs typical of sleep. Most typical, this is shown by a lack of idiomotor signaling, but snoring is also common. Lightening the trance is the best way to determine whether the subconscious, at least, is listening. Moving yet again toward higher activation, we come to the first waking state, the alpha state. Brain activity at 7 to 12 beats a second is roughly double that in the theta state. Almost all of this power, however, is devoted to sensory processing, with the right brain dominating the interpretation of events. We are aware of what is present in our environment, but not actively trying to control our experience. In a word, the mind is receptive. Athletes attain this state after exhausting themselves in competition. It is a recovery state. In the modern world, anxiety drives most of us toward higher activation, which is normally the beta state that follows. When we learn to quiet anxiety, we interpret the calm of the alpha state as bliss, forgetting that it is supposed to be normal. Behaviorally, the alpha state brings higher sensory receptivity and social harmony. The latter poses something of a chicken and egg question, as isolation is one of the primary drivers of anxiety. One hyperactive child can ruin the experience for everyone. This is the paradox of leisure. We fill our vacations with activity, when in fact we should sit on the beach until we accept that relating is the most interesting option on the menu. The alpha state, then, is also the gateway to romantic intimacy. Understanding that most behavioral difficulties arise from social crisis, we can anticipate that relief of anxiety is disruptive. As disruption opens the door to accommodation, elicitation of the alpha state is the first step in therapy. We can be guided by the practices mothers use with infants, though stroking is likely to create sexual anxiety. Still, maternal tone associates with soothing, as do gently widened eyes and palms turned upward. When such associations are lacking, we can demonstrate self-soothing by adopting the client's anxious tone and closed posture, gradually shifting to a relaxed expression. Anxiety prepares the body for conflict. Paradoxically, protecting our organs prompts abdominal tension that also limits expansion of the lungs. The loss of oxygen prevents us from marshaling enough energy to respond to stress, increasing anxiety. Breath work is another comforting disruption. Simply ask the client to relax their belly, allowing it to rise and fall with each breath. Closing the eyes and focusing on the pleasant sensations that arise when everything works with the breath as it was meant to deepens the experience. This is effective as the first step in trance elicitation. For those that carry unexpressed complaints, simply talking about them can be soothing, just as when a Band-Aid is put on a cut. Unfortunately, the opposite can be seen when bringing old wounds to light. The mind will manifest its anxiety as heightening physical tension. Remarking on these signs creates awareness that can then be channeled into actions that stretch and soothe the affected parts. The physical release is often accompanied by a softening of emotional obsession. For the self-exploitative personality, allowing the subconscious to express itself can be soothing. Closing the eyes to imagine the details of a favorite place or sensory delight reminds the client that choosing to perceive what is pleasant is the foundation of a more balanced life. The impact of these tools can be blocked when the client is burdened by the fear that they are broken. This is common when stigmas of weakness or guilt underlie their plea for help. Normalization diffuses this burden. We explained that mental discomfort arises from suppression of deep, natural, and healthy drives that are too often frustrated, but easy to satisfy once known. When their community amplifies anxiety, self-care becomes other care. The client is no longer broken, but heroically alert or valiant. While receptivity is sweet, we are driven to act. As animals, our most basic concerns are survival and procreation. When these are secured as social actors, we seek influence over others. In all cases, though, our actions will bring conflict. That can be as trivial as deciding which TV show to watch, or as fraught as fishing in a depleted sea. Resolution can be attained from negotiation or imposed through violence. The beta state, operating at 13 to 30 beats a second, is our problem-solving state. Presented with a challenge, we narrow our focus and experiment with behaviors. The exploration may be playful or aggressive, but is most effective when guided by past experience. Left brain analysis exposes the parts of the problem and predicts their behavior. We use muscles and language to probe the situation, hoping to turn the challenge to our advantage. Organically, the beta state is a state of heightened readiness. Muscular tension is elevated, depleting energy reserves. If the beta state is sustained to mental or physical exhaustion, the subconscious eventually pushes itself forward to safeguard our well-being. This undermines our relationship skills, amplifying conflict. Behaviorally, the beta state produces new experiences for us to master. In the normal adult mind, mastery is attained through consolidation and refinement in the delta and theta states. Until that is achieved, the subconscious will build anxiety around our unfulfilled goals. Stymied, the subconscious will lighten the sleep state to invite the participation of the conscious mind. Until that is understood, we tend to wake in the middle of the night and worry. Lost sleep leaves the mind unprepared for the coming day, undermining achievement and amplifying anxiety. Hristotherapy serves to interrupt anxiety's reactivity. This begins by disruption of anxiety through elicitation of the alpha state. The client experiences calm and builds alliance with us. That alone, however, is not enough to secure calm in daily life, amidst the chaos and opportunists that generate anxiety. To change daily life, the client needs new behaviors, and those behaviors are seeded from the beta state. How then do we proceed if the beta state is habitually associated with anxiety that causes us to view change as a threat? As with any form of learning, identifying the drivers of anxiety is a powerful first step. This is the goal of psychoeducation. Most important in our repertoire are the consequences of the division of the mind for our relationships with self and others, how sociability derives patterns of intimacy, the lasting effects of developmental crisis, the psychological effects of sleep, nutrition, and fitness, and the development of panic in the body. The order in which we introduce these topics accords with the client's needs. Panic is immediately relevant to phobias, while sociability is most helpful to those struggling with romantic trauma. We will expand in our modules on therapeutic applications. Having explained the links between mind and behavior, We then ask the client to set priorities. This is essential to their ownership of change, but also draws upon their intimate sense of how growth will be most profitable. This reflects expectations in pre-verbal networks, expectations that cannot be articulated, only felt within by the client. Once priorities are established, we lay out the steps in the therapeutic campaign. Universally, that involves introducing the virtues secured in the conscious mind that are the foundation of social connection. In shifting the internal dialogue from what happened and how did I feel to moral considerations, we build cohesion that improves communication between the two mental realms, the conscious and subconscious. The client moves effectively to resolve their current crisis and from there into future fulfillment. Beyond this, in each application module, you will learn techniques for dissolving the expectations that limit the client's choices. To this point, our survey of the mental states has corresponded well with our daily routine. The upward progression corresponds to the degree of engagement with the world around us. With the unsustainable activity of the beta state, it seems that nothing further could be expected. It was a surprise then when studies of master meditators revealed the fifth state, the gamma state, with activation up to 3 times greater than the beta state. As meditation is calming, how can the activity be greater in this state than in any other? Since then, we have come to understand that the gamma state is accessible whenever environment and goals are fully aligned. It is typical then of the samurai and the elite athlete. In all of these situations, rituals and preparation ensure that only familiar elements are part of the experience. The critical mind, the guardian to the subconscious realm, dissolves, allowing continuous refinement of networks that are normally isolated. The brain consequently achieves higher speed because signals are flowing more rapidly. The elite athlete is a useful illustration. Achieving such skill requires immediate feedback between the conscious mind, which evaluates outcomes, and the subconscious motor control circuits. This is sustained only when the athlete feels safe. Thus, when Bill Walsh, coach of the San Francisco 49ers during the 70s and 80s, realized that harsh criticism impeded skill development, he began using positive reinforcement. The approach was proven when the 49ers won Super Bowl after Super Bowl against teams led by tyrannical coaches. Competition alone does not create a great athlete. The superior coach breaks skills down into smaller chunks, reflecting the transitions in the development of play. In competition, the body executes each chunk automatically, while the higher parts of the mind are evaluating the changing situation and choosing the next chunk to execute. In practice, outcomes and feedback from the coach are immediately fed back to guide refinement of behaviors. What happens, though, to the athlete off the field? They are too frequently vulnerable to manipulation and angry outbursts. This is because, having been groomed within the cocoon of sport from a young age, they are not exposed to the normal social crises. The discernment of the conscious mind is underdeveloped, and thus they are vulnerable. What is going on in the mind in the gamma state? Everything, all at once. Our survey is going to seem overwhelming because it combines all the possibilities of the theta, alpha, and beta states. While in the gamma state, the mind is fully activated, psychologists speak of 2 axes of activation. Vertically, running from the forebrain down to the brainstem, our social, emotional, and practical intelligence is engaged simultaneously. Horizontally, right brain spontaneity and left brain analysis are both active. In this state, we can recognize subtle signals that precede deviations from our expectations. This intuition brings an uncanny speed in responding to events that seems to violate cause and effect. The conscious mind feels it is responding before signals are received. The Zen master uses the term non-self and co-creativity to suggest the dynamic. Organically, performance in the gamma state is nearly optimal, both physically and mentally. our achievements, being unattainable in normal waking, seem magical. This is true in the performing arts as well. Musicians and actors talk about being lifted up by the goodwill of an audience. They are given entry to a safe psychological space and tune their performance to the responses awakened in the audience. In the behavioral space, the integration and power of the gamma state allows us to respond while others are still trying to figure out what is going on. In the gamma state, we are fully responsive. Elicitation of the gamma state is achieved through a collaborative induction. Rather than suppressing conscious awareness, we encourage the subconscious to reveal itself to the conscious mind. We thus encourage the client to notice and send gratitude to the subconscious mind for all the work it does. This can be as simple as keeping our eyes lubricated, as automatic as handwriting, or as complex as forcing us to recognize that our life partner is feeling unappreciated. We then introduce the virtues of the social self. We seek to encourage the subconscious to accept that we have the maturity and wisdom to set aside our modified behaviors adopted to please our parents. Once the client is familiar with this state, we teach self-hypnosis, allowing them to schedule their conversations with the subconscious. As this practice matures, they can enter trance almost at will, often at the prompting of the subconscious that other people are doing something unexpected. As the conscious mind is active in the gamma state, depth, or navigation through layers of expectation, unfolds as an exploration of the subconscious landscape. As the entire mind is active, we activate all aspects of the personality during the induction and seek to encourage the release of expectations to allow new behaviors to manifest. Ratification then does not occur later, but is fully formed compacts and agreements between the collaborating parts of the mind. Dream incubation ensures that unanticipated side effects are accommodated. The client is also encouraged to either in state or afterwards to relate thoughts and imagery that appear with particular force. These insights are valuable in planning future sessions. Resistance to change in gamma state trance often arises through imbalance between the conscious and subconscious process. An impoverished social identity drives dependence on authorities that may resist as independence grows. The subconscious therefore hesitates to implement change until the social identity is strengthened. Conversely, when the social identity demands unsustainable effort from the subconscious, change may only be possible after the client chooses to step back to allow the subconscious to restore the strength of the body. We started our dialogue tonight with the assertion that mental states are the movements in our symphony of learning. In facilitating learning, we are responsible for organizing the client's mental state. Each step in the process has a psychological purpose. We should assume that the client enters a session with emotional baggage, which may be unrelated to their therapeutic goals. Upon calming those tensions, we offer ourselves as an ally before shifting to problem solving in the beta state. Self-discovery and psychoeducation focus this engagement, helping the client identify limiting patterns and options for removing them. Given that orientation, the client is ready to organize their mental resources to accomplish change. We elicit the trance state, offering suggestions that guide the client away from an internal tension built up around contradictory expectations, before offering choices from which we can build responses that restore well-being. The return to normal waking almost always restores the alpha state from which the client can grasp the liberating balance gained in the trance work. Home practice, reinforcing exercises, stimulate a brief trip back into the beta state, preparing the client to engage productively with daily experience at the close of the session. So let's summarize the main points from today's lesson. Our mental states ensure that learning is structured to safeguard our well-being. A hristotherapist has the opportunity to facilitate learning through effective sequencing of mental states. We use different methods to elicit the 5 mental states. Exploration of the mental states facilitates self-control for our clients. And in framing therapy as an alliance, we activate positive social expectations that will strengthen the client's partnerships in daily life. In our next session, we'll now turn toward how we elicit trance, the most powerful learning state, and also a state that you must be intimately familiar with if you are going to effectively guide the client through the exploration of the subconscious landscape. See you next time.